And welcome to this Houston Newsmakers Extra. We're talking with Congressman Dan Crenshaw. I always enjoy these conversations because it makes me think a little bit more than I normally do. Thank you, Congressman, for that. Hey, we're talking about the January 6th. You said there's no secret about what's going on, that we know what happened. Do you want to know if any members of Congress were involved? And if they were, should anything happen to them? Or do we know that they weren't involved?
I mean, we already know that many members of Congress told people to come there that day and fight, and that if we fought this day, then we could win.
Yeah.
So that's the big lie. That's what I go over in a podcast I did about a year ago. Right. Now at this point, again, 2 hours. And this is what I really was diving into. The process that was undertaken on January 6th was unconstitutional. It was simply unconstitutional. It was unconstitutional when Republicans did it. It was unconstitutional when Democrats did it before that. And it should be barred from our process. This is something Vice President Mike Pence understood very well. Okay. Now, that was the problem. So again, I don't know what we're trying to find out. And people like to compare it to a 9/11 commission. Well, it's not a good comparison because after 9/11, we had serious mysteries that needed to be solved. There were serious intelligence failures, serious miscommunications between agencies. This is the type of thing an investigation should root out. I don't know what mystery is trying to be solved here.
You know, the difference between where you are and I am, and I rarely talk about where I stand on anything, is I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody. They can tell me what they want to tell me. I want to verify, and if I don't verify it and see with my own two eyes, I just don't trust it. But that's just me. Hey, let's talk about Justin. You're fabulous director of Dan Crenshaw isms. I don't know what the title is.
He's my chief of staff.
Chief of staff. Okay. Anyway, he says a lot of good stuff. Anyway, I got these letters that have a lot of Democrats who are saying, look, this Buildback Better thing is actually going to be damaging the oil industry here. Talk about that and why it is such a concern.
Yeah. So the letters you have in hand, signed by a handful of Democrats, they make all the points that I always make, which is what's so frustrating because they voted completely differently than this very strongly worded letter that they wrote. So the strongly worded letter indicates that, look, if you put a methane fee on oil and gas companies, which is really just a natural gas tax, okay? Now, natural gas is widely used in Texas. It's widely used in America. It's widely used throughout the world. It is single-handedly responsible for reducing America's carbon emissions down to 1992 levels, because it has half the carbon emissions of, say, coal, and it's displaced coal largely in the market. So when you attack something like this, you have to ask certain questions. How are we going to power our homes? What's it going to do to our electricity prices, our energy prices? And what's it really going to do to carbon emissions? And as the Democrats note in these letters, it has a negative effect on all of these. No positive effects whatsoever. And yet, when they were given the opportunity to vote for an amendment that would strip this out of the Build Back Better plan in our committee, Energy and Commerce, they still voted against it.
Isn't that the way things are, though, in politics sometimes, that people say things and then, when they get a chance to act on it, it just doesn't, it's not the same. And there's got to be it's got to be one of your frustrations. I mean, you're finishing, you got one term behind you, got another. That's got to be one of your frustrations, is it not?
Yeah, it's certainly something you see all the time. Somebody will virtue signal, maybe send out to their email list, look, we sent this letter to Nancy Pelosi. But they know that the people on their email list and their constituents aren't actually following every amendment vote in committee. Yeah. They know they're not doing that, so they know they can get away with it. And it's up to us, and it's up to journalists to expose these kind of things. And if it ever happens to me, then you got to expose it and you got to question me about it.
Well, I plan to do that. I read a lot of your stuff. You every week when you send out stuff. But you're a conservative Republican. But now in the Republican Party, you have conservative Republicans and you have Trump Republicans. You have MAGA Republicans, and that part of the party is making a lot of noise, but it may not be good for what you stand for. True?
Yeah, so there's definitely Republicans that identify as a Trump supporter versus a Republican. Now that number has the ratio is effectively reversed since the election. So that's worth noting, just the trends there. I don't think there's that much difference, though, from a policy perspective, from a worldview perspective between the two. It's more of a difference in tone most of the time. That's the essence of conservatism. It lives in a box philosophically. You can't move too far outside of it. And if you do, you're no longer a conservative. Now there are some things that have concerned me about the right. For instance, when many people on the right were supporting $2,000 checks for people who never lost their job, that's not conservative. There's no limiting principle there. And we need to recognize that and say, look, that's populism. That's not good for the country. That's just telling people what they want to hear. That's just trying to bribe them for their votes. Don't do that. That's the Democrats do. So to some extent, there are differences that can arise. But I think for the most part, same philosophy.
Hold on, Congressman. You said you wanted to be called out on it. You're not insinuating that Republicans don't do the very same thing, right? I mean, putting things out there in order to get the vote. I mean, certainly some of the people in various districts are doing that all across this country. You know, Gosar in Arizona is saying things to his people that are like, a lot of folks say, well, that's crazy talk. But people in his district say, okay, so he's doing the same thing. So everybody's doing it, right?
Everybody panders, sure, but there's a difference between pandering and outright bribery. Now, I just gave you an example of how the right does it, right? I just gave you that example, which was the $2,000 check. There was a portion of our party that supported that, and I was blown away by that. So, I mean, I obviously I'm admitting there's examples here, but what you're talking about is a little different. It's pandering, right? It's sort of what is often political theater, you know, throwing people red meat, or in the Democrats' case, throwing them blue meat. It's a little different than what I mean by bribery. What I mean by bribery is, like, for instance, the Buildback Better plan. So it's certainly not bribing Texans, because it's destroying our oil and gas sector. It's also screwing up our hospital systems, right? There was another, going back to Buildback Better for a second, Democrats also wrote another letter to the Biden administration about the 1113 waivers for Medicaid, which would really hurt our low-income hospitals, our safety net hospitals that we have in Texas. And again, when they had the opportunity to vote against that, strip that out of the bill or help it, they voted against that amendment. So certainly not bribing Texans, but within the Build Back Better plan, there's a huge amount of new social program spending. This is what I mean. I mean direct bribery. I mean, we will give you money to make you like us. I mean, that's exactly what I mean by this.
Is there anything, you know what, God, we need to do a book. Oh, no, you've already done a book. It's called Fortitude, American Resilience in an Era of Outrage. What was your point about that, and are you happy with the response you're getting? Yeah,
I mean, that book came out right in the beginning of the pandemic, April of 2020. And I was terrified because, you know, just for all sorts of reasons. Like, this is a terrible time to come out with this book. But you know what? It was actually the perfect time to come out with that book, because it was about personal resilience. It's not a political book. You said you're starting to read it right now. You'll find that it's really not a political book. It is meant to be read by people across the spectrum, and it's a mix of I would say a book about philosophy and a book about self-help, with each chapter being a lesson in fortitude and resilience. And I am happy with how it turned out. I'm proud of it, and still doing well.
Good. Glad to hear that. And next time we're on, I'm going to talk about your aspirations for higher office, because I just kind of get a sense that might be something you might be interested in. Haven't asked you about that yet, but we're going to talk about that. Okay, Dan? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
Talk about it.
Next time around. Hey, thank you for this time. I appreciate it. I know you're busy, and my best to you and your family as you go into this new year. Okay?
Hey, you as well. Happy New Year, Kimbrell.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Newsmakers Extra. Share it with everybody you know.